How are you?
Doing well. How are you?
Awesome. Such a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining.
Of course.
Let's dive into the macroeconomic themes. I think where I wanted to start was really around, is there anything that you see as very underestimated from a macro perspective? And if so, kind of how do you see that playing out in the market?
Yeah, I think one thing just to highlight with the U.S. is that there's a lot of discussion around the labor market. And the problem with the labor market is really strictly hiring. If you look at layoffs, though, they're still quite low. They're basically what they've been in 2022, 2023, 2024. So layoff rates are still really low. It's just hiring that has slowed down. And that's also by design. We had the Fed in 2022 hiking rates, and that was meant to cool off the labor market so that wage growth would slow down and then inflation would slow down. And they've done that quite successfully. Inflation's come down from over 7% year over year for the headline PCE rate. It's down to 2.7, so pretty close to their 2% target. But now hiring as a rate, it's around the lows that we've seen the last 10 years. So now it's kind of time to start supporting the labor market. And so that's where the pivot back to rate cuts from the Fed is coming into play. But just want to make sure that people recognize that it's a hiring issue, not a layoffs issue.
Very interesting. And do you think, I guess, doing a lot of work in and around businesses that are leveraging AI, that are using AI both within their organizations to drive efficiency and hopefully increase their margins, but also that are trying to kind of bring that value of AI through into the market? One would think that that would impact, hiring, for example, or layoffs. How are you seeing that? Is that happening yet? Like, when do you think that's going to start hitting the market? Yeah,
I think it's more a headline grabber than a reality at this point. If you look at data for recent graduates, the unemployment rate for men has been rising, but for women, it's been falling. And so there's some people wondering, is that AI kind of playing a role here? And in reality, it's more that women tended to go and be overrepresented in roles that are seeing secular demand for hiring, so things like education and healthcare, which has still been recovering from COVID job losses, whereas men tend to go into sectors that have been dealing with some cyclical weakness, at least overrepresented, right? So things like manufacturing, construction, those types of sectors have actually seen small job gains or even slight job losses this year. And so that's actually a factor why the unemployment rate has been rising for men. But then almost all job gains this year, we have about 600,000 job gains year to date. About 500,000 are education and healthcare. And so that's where, women tend to take most of those jobs, at least disproportionately. And so that's why their unemployment rate has been coming down. It's not really an AI story. And if you look at adoption rates of AI, the census has a survey of businesses using AI in the last 2 weeks to produce goods and services. Just 10% of companies in the US are using AI in recent weeks to make stuff. So there's really low adoption rates still in the US, and so that's a factor why it's not really filtering through to hiring. There was a recent study from Stanford that showed that you can see controlling for everything else, controlling for rates, controlling for XYZ, the hiring has fallen for entry-level software engineers and customer service representatives. But outside of those two sectors that are kind of on the frontier of where AI is really useful, there's not an economy-wide impact on hiring because of AI.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm probably saving about 12 hours a week, I think. So quite a significant saving, but I'm a founder, so don't ask me my average hourly week. But do you think it's going to hit a tipping point where all of a sudden, because it does feel like in some guises, AI can be a little bit of a solution looking for the problem it solves. And so I'm wondering when it might hit that tipping point and almost break the dam, and then how that will impact kind of the economy when that does happen.
Yeah, long term, it's going to be a challenge, right? Because there will be a lot of disruption where certain jobs are, your job kind of falls along a spectrum of automation versus augmentation from AI. And so if you're on the automation end, then there's risk of job losses. But if you're on the augmentation end, then it's let's bring AI in here. Maybe we hire more people because now productivity is so much higher in these roles. So it's going to be finding a balance, and it's ultimately going to require some people to be potentially retrained or move to different jobs. And then those jobs that are more automated, they will need to, feed. I guess the question is, right, that with, for example, the entry-level software engineers, there's still people that need to be software engineers 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So if entry-level jobs are being replaced by AI, how do you get people with 5 years experience or 10 years experience if you're not creating them, right? So there needs to be some change in the way new hires are being trained and what their roles are. So that's going to be a big challenge too for the economy kind of writ large as AI does reach that tipping point. I don't think it's near term personally. I think this is 10 plus years out. But maybe it's going to be also more of a gradual process where certain industries are on the front end of it, and maybe we learn things from how they deal with it and can apply that to other industries that are dealing with it later on.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I still think it's going to be, a very interesting time that we're going to live through. And also with great challenge comes great opportunity. So I'm sure the retraining, and you even hear the number of people being trained to be drone pilots and things that we never would have thought. So yeah, I think it's exciting times ahead. So we often hear of people kind of conflating, and we were talking about this earlier, people conflate them, the market with the economy. How do you think of those two? How do you talk to people about that? How do those two interact from your perspective?
Yeah, I think one thing is that the market can be much more volatile than the economy, which certainly we saw earlier this year. We had S&P 500 down nearly 20%, but if you look at economic data, it was kind of chugging along. There was a few months of spotty data here and there, but overall the economy is doing quite well overall, and actually a lot of that is because of AI, where it's sort of papered over some soft spots elsewhere. If you look at essentially underlying demand growth in the first half of the year, it was about 2% in real terms. If you take tech spending out of it, it was close to zero. So that tech spending that we've seen because of all this excitement about AI was a big factor why the economy has proven to be so resilient. But of course, going forward, we've seen the consumer bouncing back and things like that. So even though the market had its jitters earlier this year, the economy has proven quite solid overall. So it's just not extrapolating what's happening in the market to the economy, because they can be quite different things at times. Overall, though, there is a link, right? Because if earnings are rising, that generally means the economy is doing well, and so stock prices will then rise. So it's just not to extrapolate those kind of one-off moments. The 1987 stock market crash, for example, there was no recession that was related to that. So these things can happen without the economy actually collapsing as well.
Really interesting. Yeah, I've never thought of it that way. And last question. If historians are looking back on the last decade, how are they talking about the biggest kind of economic impacts that we've been through?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's hard to overlook COVID and things like that, but I think from just strictly the macro perspective, we've seen a return to normal rate environment in the U.S. and around the world, right? It seemed like we had 15 years of near zero rates going on, and that seemed like the new normal. And then now here we are in 2025, and it looks like maybe that zero interest rate policy period, that was the weird part, right? So if historians are talking about last decade, they could talk about zero rates were funky, and now we've come back and look at the legacy of those two environments interacting. We see in the U.S., because of our 30-year fixed rate mortgages, people don't want to give up their low rate mortgage to buy a new home and pay a 6.3% mortgage rate on it. And so now the housing market's kind of stuck, and it's been that way for years. So there's these factors with those two environments coming together, resulting in really odd and protracted disruptions in the economy.
My takeaway is going to be they're going to describe the last decade as odd. Thank you very much. Great to speak.